I never thought a $40 pawn shop ring would turn my quiet life in Pleasant View Estates into the HOA version of a horror movie. But here we are. Folks, me, Alex Rivera, 26-year-old systems engineer. Once just another guy trying to mow his lawn exactly 2.5 inches high like the sacred covenant demanded. Now public enemy number one because Karen, yes, her actual name is Karen Delgado, president of the Pleasant View Homeowners Association, decided my family didn't embody community harmony. It started small, the way these things always do in these cookie-cutter suburbs where the welcome sign might as well read smile or else. 3 months ago, I skipped the mandatory spring potluck because I was buried in a deadline. Next thing I know, a certified letter slides into my mailbox accusing me of willful non-participation that lowers property values. Karen's signature in perfect cursive at the bottom, followed by a $250 fine and a neighborhood-wide email blast. Some residents seem to think rules don't apply to them. We're all in this together. Dear neighbors, let's remember what makes Pleasant View special. Special, she called it. Special like a velvet noose. My sister Sophie, who lives with me after her own rough patch, got dragged into it next. She hadn't left the house much lately, avoided the block parties, the voluntary yoga on the common green, the endless group chats about flag etiquette. Karen's next email labeled her withdrawn and potentially disruptive to neighborhood aesthetics. Disruptive, because apparently pale skin and closed blinds are a crime against resale value. I paid the fine, kept my mouth shut, and swallowed the rage like every other resident who'd learned the hard way that arguing with Karen just got you more citations. That Saturday, I drove to the little pawn shop on the edge of town, the one squeeze between a nail salon and a dollar store, because I lost my old college ring and my finger felt naked. The owner, Carl, barely looked up. Silver band. Plain. $40. Fits perfect. I slid it on, paid cash, and forgot about it before I even hit the highway back to Pleasant View. The ring was nothing, cold metal. No engravings. Just a cheap replacement. Until Monday. I was at the community center picking up my mail when the part-time barista Kurt handed me the HOA newsletter. Kurt, mid-30s, always polite. The guy who used to be an ER nurse before he needed something quieter, as he once muttered. The second his hand brushed mine, the ring went warm. Not body heat warm. Metal warm, like someone had just pulled it out of an oven, but only on the side facing him. I jerked my hand back. Kurt raised an eyebrow. You good? Alex? Yeah, just static or something. By the time I reached my car, the warmth was gone. Coincidence, I told myself. I'm an engineer. I deal in data, not feelings. 3 days later, it happened again. I was in the HOA office dropping off my appeal paperwork. Pointless. I knew when Karen's deputy, retired Professor Elaine Carell, glanced over my forms. Mid-sentence about variance requests, the ring heated up exactly the same way. 3 to 4 degrees. Right there against my skin. Professor Carell smiled that tight HOA smile. Metal expands. Dear, you probably touched something warm. I hadn't. I'd been holding nothing but paper. The warmth faded the second she stepped back. Still, I said nothing. But the third time I couldn't ignore it. Community yoga on the green. Mandatory attendance encouraged. Of course. I went only because Sophie begged me to stop the next fine wave. 20 minutes into downward dog. The instructor Mandy drifted over to adjust my form. The ring flared hot again. Same intensity. Same 3-meter trigger. I nearly face-planted. Mandy steadied me with a gentle hand. Breathe through it. Alex, we're all here for each other. The moment she moved to the next, Matt, the metal cooled like nothing had happened. 3 data points. 3 different people. Same impossible reaction. My engineering brain lit up like a circuit board. Patterns don't lie. That night, I started the notebook. Date. Time. Location, proximity, temperature delta measured with the cheap infrared gun I kept in my glove box. I went full obsessive. Coffee cart every morning. Warmth only when Kurt worked. HOA committee meetings. Warmth only when Professor Carell spoke. Yoga. Warmth only when Mandy taught. Never my nosy neighbor. Never Karen herself. Never random dog walkers. Exactly 3 people. Reproducible. Terrifyingly consistent. The ring wasn't broken. It was detecting something. And in Pleasant View Estates, where everything had to look perfect on the surface, that something was about to blow the whole facade wide open. I spent the next 2 weeks turning my home office into a secret lab, while Karen's emails piled up. Another violation for unsightly ring wearing during community hours. She actually wrote that, like the HOA covenant had a jewelry clause. I laughed out loud the first time, then stopped laughing when the fine hit $500. But I kept testing. I mapped the neighborhood like it was enemy territory, walked past Kurt's house at dusk, ring warmed at the property line, sat 3 rows back at the monthly meeting while Professor Carell droned about aesthetic compliance. Heat kicked in the second she said the word harmony. Signed up for Mandy's sunrise yoga, even though my back screamed. Heat every single time she corrected my pose. The pattern was ironclad. 3 to 4 degree spike within 3 meters. Peak at 1 meter. Gone the instant distance increased. Environmental factors ruled out. No sunlight angle. No phone interference. No coffee temperature. It was the people. I needed to know why. So I took the ring to my buddy Zeke, materials engineer who lived 2 streets over and hated Karen as much as I did. He owed me for covering his fines last year. Run every test you've got, I told him in his garage lab. I don't care if it costs me another fine. 3 hours later, Zeke's face was pale under the fluorescent lights. He slid an X-ray printout across the workbench. Alex, this isn't a ring. It's a goddamn sensor array. Hair-thin conductive pathways embedded in the silver. Microcircuitry that looked like it belonged in a classified lab. Not a pawn shop. Thermal element. Bioelectric sensor. All of it smaller than anything commercial. Whoever built this was decades ahead, Zeke said. It's reading electromagnetic fields, brain waves, heart rhythms, something hyperspecific. And it only triggers for 3 signatures in the entire neighborhood. You've got a biological detector on your finger. Man, I left his garage with my head spinning and Karen's latest letter in my pocket. Mr. Rivera, your recent experiments with that unusual jewelry have been noted by multiple residents. We expect full compliance or further action will be taken for the good of Pleasant View. Good of Pleasant View. The phrase tasted like poison now. Instead of fighting her head on, I did what engineers do. I observed the 3 targets. Casual questions at the coffee cart. Kurt, you ever miss the ER? He went quiet, eyes distant. Every day. But the pain I felt, every patient's pain like it was mine. Literally. Went home with chest tightness when they coded. Migraines when they had head trauma. Thought I was losing it until I quit. Professor Carell, during office hours she kept for neighbor consultations, admitted she couldn't watch neighborhood watch videos anymore. Too visceral. I feel the fear in my own bones. And Mandy, after yoga, while we rolled mats, I work part-time at the special needs daycare downtown. Nonverbal kids. I just know when their jaw hurts or their stomach's in knots. I feel it here, she tapped her chest. Always have. Mirror touch synesthesia. I spent nights reading every paper I could download without tripping HOA data usage flags. Rare neurological wiring. Hyperactive mirror neurons turning observed pain into felt pain. 1 in 100,000. I found 3 in one gated community. The ring's creator had to be a genius. I drove back to the pawn shop. Carl pulled the record without blinking. Sold by Jonah Hartman 2 months ago. Mom passed. Needed cash. Jonah answered on the first ring. We met at the neutral coffee shop outside the gates. Karen's spies were everywhere inside. He was 22, eyes raw from grief. When I showed him the ring, he almost dropped it. Mom's prototype. Dr. Iris Hartman, neuroscientist. She had mirror touch herself, severe. Built this to find others so no one else would suffer alone. Iris had lived in Pleasant View years ago, Jonas said, until the previous HOA board, Karen's mentors, find her into oblivion for erratic behavior at community events. She left broken. The ring was her last project. Detect the exact electromagnetic signature of hyperactive mirror neurons and warm up. A beacon for the lonely. She died before she could deploy it. Jonah pressed the ring back into my hand. Keep it. Mom would want it used. That night, I sat Sophie down in our living room. Blinds drawn against Karen's nightly patrol. Sophie, 20, thin from never leaving the house. Eyes hollow. The ring heated the second I crossed the 3-meter line. She noticed my flinch. Alex, what's wrong? I told her everything, the tests, the 3 neighbors, the science. Jonah's mom. When I said the words, "You physically feel other people's pain," her face crumpled. How did you know? I thought I was crazy. Every potluck, every forced smile, I feel their irritation, their secret judgments, like knives in my ribs. Doctors said anxiety. Karen said I was damaging property values. Tears rolled down her cheeks. You're not crazy, Sophie. You're wired differently, and you're not alone. For the first time in 3 years, she smiled like she meant it. But Karen wasn't done. The next morning, another certified letter. The Rivera residence is in violation of aesthetic and participation standards. Emergency HOA board meeting called. Your sister's condition will be discussed publicly for the protection of the community. Protection. The word burned hotter than the ring ever had. I looked at Sophie, then at the silver band on my finger, and felt the first real smile in months. Karen wanted a war over harmony? Fine. I had just armed 3 secret empaths and a ring that proved everything she pretended to care about would lie. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday night in the community center. Fluorescent lights buzzing like angry bees. Folding chairs arranged in perfect rows because Karen loved symmetry more than people. I walked in with Sophie beside me. First time she'd left the house in weeks, and the ring was already warm because Kurt, Professor Carell, and Mandy were all there, scattered among the crowd like quiet landmines. Karen stood at the podium in her pastel blazer, clipboard gleaming, smile sharp enough to cut glass. Neighbors, we gather tonight not out of malice, but love. The Rivera family has repeatedly shown disregard for the covenants that keep Pleasant View beautiful and safe. We must address this compassionately, but firmly. Compassionately. I almost laughed. The room murmured agreement, most of them terrified of the next fine hitting their own mailboxes. Karen's voice dripped honey. Miss Rivera's refusal to participate has created an atmosphere of negativity. We've received complaints, anonymous, of course, that her presence lowers morale. Sophie's hand tightened on mine. The ring spiked hotter. Mandy was shifting in her seat, feeling the collective discomfort like it was her own. I stood up. Before you vote to fine us into homelessness, I have something to show the board. Karen's eyes narrowed. Mr. Rivera, this is not the time for theatrics. Actually, it's exactly the time. I held up the ring. This little piece of metal has been mapping something none of you want to admit exists in your perfect neighborhood. I laid out the data, printed charts, temperature logs, proximity graphs, projected on the screen behind her. The room went dead silent. 3 residents in Pleasant View carry a documented neurological condition called mirror touch synesthesia. They literally feel your stress, your pain, your fake smiles as physical sensations in their own bodies. And your precious rules are torturing them. Gasps rippled. Kurt stood first, voice steady. I left nursing because I carried every patient home with me. Your mandatory events? I feel every eye roll, every whispered complaint about my lawn edging. It's exhausting. Professor Carell rose next, elegant even in anger. I stopped attending board meetings for a year because the passive-aggressive comments felt like needles. You call it harmony. Karen, I call it slow-motion cruelty. Mandy was crying openly now. I feel the kids at daycare, and then I feel all of you here, your judgment, your fear of being next. I almost quit teaching yoga because of it. But I stayed because someone has to care. The ring on my finger was blazing. All three were within range, and the truth was pouring out. Karen's face flushed crimson. This is ridiculous. Some circus trick to avoid responsibility. We have rules for a reason, property values. Decorum. I cut in, voice low and cold. Your last email called my sister mentally unstable. You find her for closed blinds while your own cousin parks his boat on the street for months without a single notice. Selective enforcement much? I clicked the next slide. Zeke had helped me pull public records and security cam stills I'd quietly collected over the weeks. Photos of Karen's friends breaking every rule she enforced on us. The room turned. Whispers became mutters. Someone in the back, old Mr. Thompson, usually silent, stood up. I've watched you destroy 3 families with these fines. Karen, if these people are hurting because of your harmony, maybe the problem isn't them. Sophie stepped forward, voice shaking but clear. I feel everything you pretend to fix. Every time you smile while writing citations, it hurts in my chest. I'm not broken. I'm just wired to care more than you ever will. The ring cooled as the 3 empaths moved closer to her in silent support. Karen tried to regain control, voice rising into that shrill register. Every HOA dictator eventually hits. This meeting is adjourned until we can verify these wild claims. But the board members were already shifting. Professor Carell, who happened to be the treasurer, quietly said, Actually, Karen, the bylaws allow a vote of no confidence right now. Hands went up, one by one, 23 in favor of removing her. Karen stood there clutching her clipboard like a shield, face twisting into something ugly and small. You'll regret this. Property values will plummet without strong leadership. Kurt smiled for the first time I'd ever seen. They might actually rise when people stop living in fear. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Neighbors hugging Sophie, asking questions. The 3 empaths, suddenly the center of a circle of real empathy instead of forced politeness. Karen stormed out, heels clicking like retreating gunfire. And for the first time in months, the community center felt like a neighborhood instead of a prison. The weeks after the meeting were a beautiful kind of mess. Karen's removal was official by Friday, board vote unanimous. Her name scrubbed from the website with surgical precision. The new interim president, Mandy of all people, immediately suspended the most ridiculous fines and called an emergency listening session instead of the usual enforcement rally. Sophie started leaving the house again. Short walks at first. Ring warm whenever she passed Kurt or Professor Carell because they understood without needing words. I wore the ring every day now. A quiet reminder that the most powerful things in this world are the ones you can't see on a checklist. Jonah drove up one weekend, and we sat on my porch, newly legal without a permit, while he told Sophie stories about his mother. She used to say the HOA here drove her out because they couldn't handle someone who felt too much. Now, look at you, turning the whole place around. Sophie laughed. The sound rusty, but real. I'm writing it all down. A blog? Maybe. What it feels like when a neighborhood hurts you back. If even one person reads it and realizes they're not crazy, it's worth every fine Karen ever slapped on us. The dark humor hit hardest when Karen's former allies started pretending they'd always hated her. Mrs. Ellison from across the street, who'd reported Sophie's blinds twice, showed up with a casserole and an awkward apology. I didn't know it was hurting people. Kurt took one bite and winced theatrically. Tastes like guilt. Ma'am. Needs more empathy. We all laughed until we cried. But the real satisfaction came at the first official meeting under the new rules. I sat in the front row, ring cool for once, because the three empaths were right beside me like a quiet army. The agenda was short. Rewrite the covenant with compassion clauses. When it came time for public comment, I stood, held up the ring, and said simply, "This thing saved my sister and exposed a bully." Science doesn't lie. Neither does pain when it's shared. Professor Carell added, "We're not asking to remove all rules, just the ones that punish people for being human." The vote passed 48-2. Two holdouts were Karen's last cronies. They slunk out muttering about lawsuits that never materialized. Karen herself never came back. Rumor said she moved to another gated community 2 towns over, probably already measuring grass with a ruler and terrorizing new victims. We never saw her again, and Pleasant View breathed easier. Sophie started therapy with a specialist who actually understood sensory processing instead of slapping an anxiety label on everything. She took the train to Philly one weekend to meet more people like her through the network Jonah and I were quietly building, online forums, resource lists, even a prototype app based on his mom's original schematics. The ring still warms sometimes when new empaths visit, and every time it does I feel the same rush of vindication. I used to think engineering was about circuits and code. Turns out the most elegant system in the universe is the one that lets people stop suffering in silence. Karen tried to break us with rules written on paper. We broke her with truth, written in nervous systems she could never feel. And the best part? The neighborhood finally looks the way she always claimed it should. Happy, connected, genuinely harmonious, but now it's real instead of enforced. No more anonymous complaint boxes. No more midnight clipboard patrols. Just people who understand that sometimes the strongest residents are the ones who feel everything, and the weakest are the ones who feel nothing at all. I still wear the ring. It's just a plain silver band to anyone else. But to me, it's proof that the smallest thing, a $40 pawn shop trinket, can heat up, light up, and burn down an entire empire of fake smiles when the time is right. And if you're watching this, living under your own HOA overlord, maybe pick up a cheap piece of jewelry sometime. You never know what it might reveal when the Karen in charge finally pushes too far. 6 months later, the for sale signs started disappearing, and new families moved in asking about the nice, relaxed vibe instead of the old strict but fair reputation. Sophie's blog had gone mildly viral in the chronic illness and neurodivergent corners of the internet. Hundreds of messages from people who finally had a name for the pain they carried. One woman wrote, "I thought I was weak for crying at every neighbor's bad day. Turns out my mirror neurons were just doing their job." She moved to Pleasant View 2 weeks later. Kurt, Professor Carell, and Mandy became unofficial mentors, hosting quiet coffee hours where empaths could drop the mask and just exist. I watched Sophie bloom in those rooms, color returning to her cheeks, laughter coming easier. The ring never failed. It still warmed the second any new person with the condition crossed the invisible 3-meter line, and we'd welcome them like long-lost family. Karen tried one last pathetic comeback, mailed an anonymous letter to the new board claiming we'd rigged the vote with pseudoscience. The board laughed, scanned it, and pinned it on the community bulletin board under the heading Exhibit Why We Changed the Rules. I took a photo and sent it to Jonah. He replied with a single emoji, fire. The final perfect moment came on a sunny Saturday when the entire neighborhood gathered for a potluck, not mandatory, just invited. Sophie stood at the grill flipping burgers, ring warm because Kurt was handing out plates nearby. No one measured the grass. No one side-eyed the flags. Mandy led a casual yoga stretch for whoever felt like it. And Professor Carell read excerpt from Sophie's blog out loud, while people nodded instead of judging. I stood on the edge of the green, ring cool against my skin for once, because everyone who needed to be close already was. For the first time since I'd bought that stupid piece of silver, the neighborhood felt like the name on the welcome sign, Pleasant View. Not enforced, just pleasant. And somewhere across town, Karen was probably measuring her new lawn with a laser level and screaming at another family about mailbox height, completely unaware that the weapon that destroyed her first empire was still out there, tiny, unassuming, and ready to heat up the next time someone needed to expose the lie that rules matter more than people. I slipped the ring off for a second, felt the ordinary cool metal, then slid it back on. Some tools don't need instructions. They just wait for the right hand, the right moment, and the right Karen to push the wrong family too far. Then they turn warm, turn the tables, and turn the whole damn neighborhood free. If you're still watching, drop your own HOA horror story in the comments. Have you ever been fined for existing too loudly or too quietly? Did a cheap object ever accidentally save your sanity? Let me know. And if this tale of a ring that exposed fake empathy and toppled a suburban dictator gave you even a flicker of that sweet justice feeling, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one, because somewhere out there another Karen is measuring grass and another ring is waiting to get warm.